So I write with joy. I lean into joy whenever I pick up my laptop and I'm like, I'm gonna write a story. And then everything I do from there on is just having fun. Like, the chapters fall into place because it's the most fun that I could do while writing this story. So if I'm keeping that in mind, when I'm coming up with the concept of a story, it really is, how do I do X, Y, and Z? And with A Song of Salvation, it is following after The Silent Stars, The Kindred. So I wanted it to be in the same universe, which means that I had to tie everything together, which was really that struggle that I was telling you about.
Yeah.
And then I just was like, okay, let's have fun and see what happens. And that's really how all of my books have come together, is let's see what happens. And hopefully Inkyard was gonna say yes. They did. And I was very lucky, and once it was all drafted, the process of revising it was easy, and really it's always about the concept, and I had a lot of inspiration from Star Wars to The Fifth Element to all of these different things that just kind of tied together and made it really joyful. Yeah.
And you really can feel that. I think I DM'd you, where I like read the prologue and I was like, wait, this whips. It's so fun. And it like, and I think that's like very cool that you say that you write with joy, and like that's like the core of your process, because it absolutely comes through. Like, you can tell that you're having a good time, and it's so fun to read. So like that's also, so that is like very well done, first of all, and also like super comes through. Also, I'm like Space DJ is just so funny to me. Like it's like that concept just makes me so giddy, which I love.
I mean, like, isn't it like most writers? I think when you have an idea and you are excited about it, you write it, and then you just keep getting more and more excited about it. I just cling to that excitement the entire time. If I struggle to write something, then I have to ask myself if I'm the best person to write it at this moment. And if I can't say yes, then I will set it aside. But I generally know that by 3 chapters in.
Yeah.
So once I have those first 3 chapters, I'm like, oh, okay, I'll write this book, and then I do.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah. Well said. Good job, Keenan. But so I just got so distracted from my next question, which would be, so you wanted the 3rd book to be in this universe, and how did you feel like where did it find its place? You know what I mean? Like what was the new story you wanted to tell in this world following The Kindred?
Yeah, so every book has been a different challenge, right? I knew what I wanted to do with the first book, and that was already difficult because I did 2 point of views, one of which was an alien point of view, so I did it in 3rd person, and that was really challenging. And then with the second one, it was connected, like both point of views were connected the entire time, so I had to be very careful about how I rearranged those chapters so that it made total sense. And then with the 3rd one, I just decided I'm gonna do whatever makes sense to me, and I'm gonna have fun.
Yeah.
And then I did, but
then I did. End of sentence.
And I did, but you know, every book has to have a challenge. If I'm doing the same thing, then it's not good for anybody. It's not good for the readers. It's not good for me. I have to be challenging myself. I have to be in a constant state of learning and improving and honing my craft. So at that point, it really was, how am I going to make this story as big and as bold as I can, while also improving myself and making sure that this is going to connect with readers. And that is, once you have that idea in your head, then you go with it, and you're like, okay, I'm challenged here, and that's why I was able to ask for help, because I knew that this was maybe a little outside of the zone I had written in before. So when I asked for help, I understood what I needed to do, and then I really just stuck with it.
Yeah. And I have, in terms of just finding the core of it and then finding fun and just like writing something joyful, I think I've said about Raven Song that it's just 300 pages of me telling myself jokes that I think are funny. And so like I think that is such like a fun like process, and I see that a lot in my process, and it's like very fun to hear you say that. So I also wanted to ask you about the world building in general, and because like you said, this book is huge, it's expansive, it takes galaxies, right? Like it's a whole universe. And so I wanted to kind of ask you what your process was for, first of all, coming up with all of that, because it's huge, and then also fleshing it out, and what stuff did you draw from either in current events, because obviously you have a lot of really like very forward themes of colonialism and imperialism there, and I wanted to kind of hear what your process was in finding those world building elements and implementing them like you did, because they're very well done.
So the trick is to be organized. You have to be
very,
very, very organized. When I started The Sound of Stars, I had a spreadsheet, and everything I created, I put in that spreadsheet.
Okay.
And so I would remember what I did.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 books in, now I'm like consulting the spreadsheet so that I'm consistent.
Yeah.
But also I want to take that and make it more, right? And with the Song of Salvation, it is, it's a different scope, because the first book was very grounded sci-fi and earth-based. The second was more universe and then earth-based, and then the third is just universe.
Right.
And so I built up to it, but that meant that I got to create this entire universe and then expand upon it and really just go wild with my imagination, and then whatever I was excited about I did. And I created things within A Song of Salvation that sounded really cool. And I thought it was very cool. You know, does it fit the plot? Maybe not, but it's what I wanted to do, so I did it. And then my editor would be like, "This is really fun. This is working." And that was great for me, because that meant I could just do whatever I wanted. But it did have to fit with those themes that I was trying to hit, and be consistent, and make sure that it felt accessible, but also that if you were a new teen reader, you would know that you could pick up this book and you would be able to find yourself in it.
Right.
So I didn't want it to be too difficult, and I think sci-fi always runs that risk of being just a little out of reach for some readers. So it's a lot of balancing and organization.
Right.
Yeah.
Dang. Okay. So none of that helps me. I do say one of my low-key author tips is get good at Excel, because I live and die by my Excel spreadsheets, I will say. So that's fun to hear you say that. I also
it's not fun.
Well, it's
not a fun.
I don't know, you can make them pretty.
I have not.
Okay. Well, you could. We have the technology.
We have it. It's really just a jump off point, and so that I don't get confused by what I've done. And I say that A Song of Salvation it's my 3rd book, but it's technically book 18 now.
Right.
So everything is so spaced out. By the time this was done, my next book that comes out in October was done, and then another book was done, and it was just so I'm always in a space of writing about 5 books at a time.
Right. Yeah.
And so I have to have that organization, otherwise I will mess up.
No,
but I also write in so many different genres as well, so it does keep it I can know what I'm doing when I'm opening a title. I know what I'm gonna do. There are times I have an idea and I'm like, oh yeah, this is the YA sci-fi, and then this one's the YA fantasy, and this one's the middle grade fantasy, and that one's the middle grade murder mystery. So it's
dang, just flexing.
You're keeping no. And then I did an adult rom-com as well, so it's all these different things, so I know which one is which. But I am very careful about what stage I'm on with each of them.
Right.
So if I'm revising A Song of Salvation, it's okay if I'm revising Just a Pinch of Magic, but I can't, for instance, write another YA sci-fi at the same time, because then I would mess it up. Yeah.
Okay, so when you're working on multiple projects, they have to be in the same development stage?
It helps. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Huh. That's very cool.
But it's mostly the genres. I have to be I can't, if I'm working on a YA sci-fi, I can't read any sci-fi at all.
Yeah, I get that.
And I read a lot for fun, but I cannot read sci-fi. Yeah, I do. I read.
I'm kidding. I was like, wait, you a writer read for fun? Wild.
And on a good year, I can read about 100, 150.
Oh dang.
On a bad year, like last year, which I was working on too many books at once, I read like maybe 20 to 30.
Yeah.
And that was a bad year, because I think when I'm not reading, I'm not taking in as much as I would like, and I'm not improving myself.
I totally agree. That was a really big problem of getting back into reading once I graduated school, because I just my brain was fried. So I totally get that, and like having to kind of like keep that motor running. So
Yeah.
absolutely, I think this is like very old chestnut advice, but it's very like one of the only things that is prescriptive and one size fits all about writing is that you have to read.
Yeah.
Like you have to. Like it's like you just do. Sorry.
You do. I know that that's not always the most digestible advice, but it is true.
In your
You
genre,
have to be always in a state of taking in media in general, because if you're not taking something in, your well runs dry, and then you have nowhere to create from as well. So you have to be in this state of. I had a mentor who told me, Tamara Mateo, who said, you have to be able to inhale art so that you can exhale art. And that is true, as much as I don't enjoy that, because then you're like, I have to make time for this thing.
Right.
It's not, I'm not making money from this, I'm not doing it.
And it's like a weird thing, because it feels like you're doing it for fun when it's just like, it is fun, but it's also your job. It's like the weird thing where you're just like, I could be writing, and it's like, no, but you need to like refill the well and do all of that.
It is hard to shut off though, because you will read something and then you're like, oh, I love how they did this. How do I learn from this, and how do I incorporate this? And then there are times when you're reading something that's so good that you're incapable of having thoughts. And you're just like, this is so good. And then it causes like this other thing in your head where you're like, this is so good, I will never be at this level.
Right.
How on earth did the author do that? And then sometimes I'll show up with like in the author's DMs, or I'll write them and I'll be like, how did you do that?
Yeah, like explain yourself.
Explain it in total detail so that I can use that later, please.
No, 90% of my author friendships are me just being like, I'm obsessed with you, like, be my friend. So, no, that's honestly good for you for like reaching out to people, because I always get so intimidated.
I mean, I get intimidated too, but the worst they can do is be like, not respond.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I will always show up and I'll be like, I think I wrote to Talia Hibbert, who is like a huge author. And I asked, how did you do that? And Talia just showed up and was like, yeah, here's how I did it. I'll read some of your book for you and see what I like, if there's anything I can pick. And then they read it, and it was very good feedback.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that, because in my head, I'm not on Talia Hibbert level, and I'm still not. But the idea that Talia Hibbert was kind to me in that moment and was helpful was just.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. So speaking of just other authors and kind of like learning from craft, is there anyone who you find yourself kind of like returning to again and again, or that anyone who's specifically you found yourself inspired by for this book? I know you said it's like a lot of Star Wars, like space opera stuff, but like what did you kind of take from media-wise for this book?
So, of course, it was Beth Revis, it was Rebecca Coffendecker, it was Laura Beth Johnson, who are incredible authors who I'm very lucky to call friends as well over the years. But I take from everybody. Jenny Howe is right. And Jenny Howe, whenever Jenny Howe writes a book, it's just like the most clever you can get. And you're just like in awe of the thoughtfulness in the prose. And you're just, wow. Of course, I also look at Daniel Jose Older.
For sure.
And it's not even just the genre, it's just the style of writing too, where it's like Johnny Garzavilla. Like it's like just so many people. Adiba Jaigirdar. There you go. Just all these authors who I've looked at, and it's not necessarily in the genre, but the way they tell a story is very interesting. I love Becky Albertelli and how she writes prose that feels so easy to read.
Yeah.
And that's such a talent.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was like understanding my own style, it was really going, okay, I want that level of accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
And so I looked at that
Mm-hmm.
as well.
For sure. I think that's a really good point, especially with when you're dealing with something which can be very concept heavy, as sci-fi, especially a sci-fi as big as this, like making sure it's accessible and making sure that young readers, because you are writing for young readers, are able to kind of just pick it up and understand is really, really important. So that's a really good point about going to people whose work is really accessible, even if they're not in genre. And that's what we were just saying, which is like you have to read everything, right? You have to read out of your genre and beyond. So I think that's a really good point. But okay, so I want to circle back to your spreadsheet because we got a little bit distracted, but did have a question. So is there anything in the world building or in that like you kind of built that didn't necessarily like make the final cut that just you really liked as part of the world? Or was there anything you had to kind of like kill your darling that was part of the world building that didn't make it to the final page?
No.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
How?
No.
Explain.
But see, the thing is, when I write a book, I'm in a state of always writing and editing at the same time.
Oh, okay.
So I read the last 3 chapters when I go to sit down and write the next.
Really? Okay.
Always. So I will always be consistent with however I was feeling the day before.
Okay, sure.
And I will know what I was thinking the day before.
Mhm.
And I can continue that on. Of course, I have a synopsis already, so I know what I have to do.
Oh, of
But I
course.
just need to make sure that I'm on the same sentence level structure, right? You know what I mean? But there are times where you're organized and you understand what you're doing, and then you write a book, and it hovered, for me, every book has hovered around the same word count.
Oh, interesting.
So I don't
What word
usually
count?
end up like, well, with the Sound of Stars, that was the one where I added more.
Okay.
I think I sold it at 98,000 words. And then it published at 104,000 words.
Really?
So that was when I added. The Kindred was at 96,000 and it stayed around 97,000. And then A Song of Salvation, I think, was around 85,000 and it stayed around 85,000.
Wow.
I don't overwrite and I don't underwrite. I just get it.
You're like, I do it right the first time.
No, but it's never the first time. So by the time I'm handing in a draft, it's maybe like draft
Right.
5, draft 6.
Yeah, fair enough.
Because it's always, it's one of my worst traits, I think, as a
You're very meticulous.
that I have to be very precise
Yeah.
with what I was doing because I want it. I'm not searching for perfection. I'm making sure that what I've done is good.
Mhm.
And that is my problem.
Right.
Because then I will get in my own head about this and I'll be
Mhm.
like, is it good enough? Are you the best at what you're doing? Are you telling the story the right way?
Mhm.
And that most of my insecurities come out within like the concept stage.
Mhm.
By the time I've sat down to write it, I'm no longer asking those things.
Okay.
But getting there, that could be weeks.
Interesting.
I have to conceptualize something for weeks.
Right.
I have to see it in my head. It's like when you go back to world building,
Mhm.
you know, with world building, at the center of world building is asking yourself a question, and everything you do to add in the story is answering it.
Mhm.
And so when I'm doing that, I'm really like, okay, how am I doing this the right way?
Mhm.
What am I doing?
Right.
Yeah, and
You're just like, hell.
but once I've established it,
Yeah.
it makes total sense. It's just that the concept of it has to be like, they have to see it. So it's like if you watch a movie and you see a scene and you are gonna write that scene down, you have to really look at it for every little detail to make sure that the whole film like you see a whole fully colored scene, right? And so now everything I do in that scene has to be precise.
Mhm.
I have to see it.
Right.
Otherwise, I think the reader gets lost and then I also get lost writing it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so funny. This is something I love talking about other writers and their process because I can't relate to that even a little bit. Not like I wish my process were more like that, and I know there are issues with, like, everyone kind of has their own foibles, I genuinely sit down and just yappity sax myself a story, and then it's just 100,000 words of absolute hot nonsense. I'm like, I'll fix it later. Like, that's so.
That would stress me out
Oh,
so much.
I'm so stressed.
Yeah.
I'm so stressed out. It's good for no one.
I mean, but you know, there's also the problem with mine is that, you know, it took me years to figure this out this process. It took me years.
Right.
But now when I write a story, it's so in me that I don't struggle with those things anymore.
Right.
Like, I've gotten better with each book, and now I feel like I'm writing a book right now that's coming out in 2025, and no, but like I am, and now I'm like, okay, now how do I apply everything I've learned,
Right.
all the tools that I have, and I make this the best I can.
Right.
And then there's like that real insecurity hit me right off, because I'm like, I'm doing something I've never done before.
Right.
And I'm gonna try, and I'm gonna hope it succeeds.
It will. But that's what's fun, right? Like, it's like, it's again, like the old, like, I'm just gonna keep quoting old, like, writer chestnuts, right? But you always want the last thing you wrote, or like the first thing you wrote, like, you always want to be getting better. I just butchered that. I was.
You always want to be
Well
getting
said.
better.
Thank you. You can see the smoke coming out of my ears as I try to process. My God.
But again, I do have, because I have Jenny Howe, because I have so many people who write very, very clever.
Yeah.
I know that this approach for this YA book has to be very clever.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have all of these people and books that are going to help me understand how to do that.
Right.
But it does take a while to make sure you are approaching that right.
Right. For
You
sure.
know, I think for a lot of writers, when they're thinking about books, they're thinking about how do you land the plane,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm thinking about how I'm going to get the plane in the
I
air.
agree with that. No, I'm the
So,
same way.
If I can't see the runway,
Mhm.
I don't know how we're going to get up into the
Mhm.
sky.
Or you have an idea and you know you don't have the technical skill for it yet, and it just has to sit and percolate for like years
Takes
until you
years.
level it up.
I have a horror story in
Mhm.
me that I have been thinking about for like 5 years, and I still know that I'm not there yet.
Right.
I'm not there
It's the
yet.
weirdest feeling that you're just like, I know I'm not, like I'll get there. It's gotta let it cook.
Yeah, it has to stay there for a
Yeah.
while. And I also know that if I write it, I'm gonna be terrified by myself. So there's like,
That's fair.
I'm like already preemptively scared. Like, I know it's gonna be too scary, and now I'm like, uh-oh, I'm gonna lose sleep over this. I better not write it up as well. Like, so I can't do it. Like, I'm putting that into my own head. Like, it's gonna be terrible.
Hopefully the rooster is dead by the time you're trying to write. Just for quick context, we were talking earlier, and her neighbor in Germany has a rooster who she thought was a ghost. For context on that comment. So again, I'm circling back because something you said was very, very smart, and I want to kind of talk about that a little bit. Was you said that all world building is just asking yourself a question. What, for this universe, and then specifically for your expansion into the Song of Salvation, what question were you trying to answer? What was that?
I have a lot of questions. So with the Sound of Stars, it was, I put a black teenage girl in the center of all three stories.
Mm-hmm.
The first one, Ellie is, she's a rebel. The second book, Joy, is resigned. And then with the Song of Salvation, Zara is enraged. She is full of rage. And I wanted to do it this way because I really wanted to look at how black women feel in this world. And there are these stages of it. One point you are rebellious and you start to see the cracks in that, and it makes you bitter. And then at one point you're resigned because you've given up on the fight already, because you don't think there's any point in fighting it. And then the last part is you are so mad that you will break the world. And that is what I was trying to do with each of them. And I hope I succeeded.
I would say.
I hope I did, but it was like, that's what I wanted to, that was the question of what it looks like to live in a universe where you are always expected to save it. And at the same time, you're not supposed to talk about how you're struggling with that.
Right.
Or what's expected of you and how you're often ignored, or how you are just getting so mad.
Right.
But at the same time, you have no place to put that anger.
Right.
So that was how I looked at it when it came to writing whole universe, that was something totally else. It was really just how beautiful do I want to make it, and then how relevant do I want to make it to what teens will understand, and how do I draw that back and give them something to think about.
Sure.
And also give them hope.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a really tough balancing act. And so, as you kind of talked about, like you were very, very detailed, like concept stage, right? Is that something you figured out when you were developing this concept, or is that sort of a tightrope that you found yourself walking as you were writing it? Do you know what I mean?
No, I think I get it all out in the concept stage.
Okay.
So, I mean, there's always this point where you're writing and you're like, oh, this character's really good. Like, this is a great character. I really have to sit with this character a bit more, because if I let them die in this scene, I will feel really bad about this. I can't do that. So there are times when I have to like shift the plot a little bit, or there are times where I'm like, I want to keep this person alive, but I also know they can't, so they have to die.
Right.
And there are times where you have to make those tough choices.
Yeah.
I mean, thank goodness it's fiction. Because otherwise that would be really totally different.
Otherwise that would be different.
Yeah,
it's a different conversation. It's different.
Yeah, that would be different. But this was, there are times where you are really thinking about how you want to tell the story, what concept you're going to do, what themes you're going to try, and then how you're going to get there.
Right.
And sometimes you shift little things. I shift little things. It's like moving the furniture around in your house. The furniture stays the same, but you're just putting it in a different place. And that's really what writing a book to me is. It's really rearranging the words to make sure that you're entertained and it's a good story.
Sure. Yeah. And in terms of writing this book, was there anything unexpected that you didn't expect to either be as impactful as it was, or didn't expect to kind of like love as much as you did, and then you just sort of discovered it as you were going through or conceptualizing that was unexpected to you? That was really interesting.
I have a character in this one, the Space DJ, who is the funniest character to write, because he is very close to me on the surface. Like he is like very intense and funny and goofy and just enjoys life and is like, I believe in love and truth and all these things, and it's so naive but it's so loving. So I had a lot of fun writing those, but I didn't know that I was going to love writing those.
Oh, interesting.
I wasn't sure how that was going to go. I knew I had to, because that was how I wanted to tell a story. But then as I started doing them, I realized how those transcripts and those like podcasts, they glued the story together.
Right.
They gave you levity in places that you needed it. It made the story feel very wholesome. It felt very full. And I didn't know that going in. So that was great for me, and I realized a lot about that as well. But the thing is also, I don't know, I have all these great ideas, and I'm like, I can't conceptualize it, and I'm not organized about it. But then there are times when I'm doing an interview, and then somebody asks you a really good question, and then you're like, oh, did I do that? I think people, first I always think people think I do things a lot smarter than I do. And then there are times where I'm like, but wait a minute, did I do that because it's somewhere in the back of my brain I was connecting that? Maybe, but then maybe I should also give myself the credit for that, but I'm like, no,
you totally
don't do that.
Oh, you so should. I feel like so much of writing is very subconscious, and so much of the whole, when you realize you've done accidental foreshadowing or something like that, you're like, oh, genius. I think there's so much of that is part of the process that isn't as active. So, I mean, one, to answer, yes, take credit for that, you did it. So, first of all. But then, yeah, that's the end of that.
I can also say that I've had very good editors. I had a publisher that said yes. So having all of those things already meant that when I was looking at this and revising this, I was getting some of the best work out. Because it's like it's like you baked this delicious cake, and you now have somebody telling you which icing is going to be the best part.
Right.
Like which one's going to match it beautifully.
For sure.
And sometimes I have this idea, I'm like, oh, that's going to do it. But then you have this editor who steps in and is like, this is great, let's expand this. And you're like, oh wow, I didn't think about that. That's so smart. And so far every editor has really taught me a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I've learned from the process of this that I've gotten like, because I have that process that I do, and I think I'm like, really, it's like I work very consistently.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason I do is because I have great people helping me as well. I have very good critique partners.
Mm-hmm.
One of which is Tracy Badua, who I wrote a book that's coming out next year called The Cookie Crumbles. And she has helped me every time, and I read her stories to get them ready to send to her editor. And then I read hers and I'm like, oh, she's so good. And then I think, like, how do I take this? How do I understand this? How do I make this like part of my work too?
For sure.
Like, how do I approach that with my writing?
Mm-hmm.
And that has always, like, I leveled up already just because I have very smart people around me.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I absolutely agree with that. That's one of the most rewarding parts for me, at least, of being a writer, is getting to interact with other writers, because you're just like everyone is so smart and talented. This is so cool. So I totally agree with you on that one. So my kind of final like world building question is, obviously, like, music and the power of voices and songs are really, really heavily, like, very important thematic elements in your work. And so are you like a music person? Like where did that symbolism and significance?
Well, my dad's right here.
Called out.
Yeah, my dad is right here. He is a musician, and I grew up with music.
Gotcha. Okay. There you go.
And that would be it.
Yeah, ask
No,
and answer, Your Honor.
I mean, I listen to a lot of music. I listen to music all the time. It is very cathartic to me. So when I was approaching the idea of science fiction with music, the thought process is that no matter what you are, you feel vibrations, and vibration, it sounds like music. And so that would be a very big bridge between you and somebody else who maybe is not the same species, not the same at all. But that's the bridge you can cross to each other.
Sure.
And so that art in general is how I think people connect. And using that from The Sound of Stars was like, that informed The Kindred, that informed A Song of Salvation, especially because it's that idea of everything has a sound. And what if all these sounds came together harmoniously in a universe?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And did you find that kind of really dovetailed into, especially with this book, how we were talking about how your protagonist is very angry, and using your voice to make noise, not just to make music, but to make a statement? And like, did that kind of dovetail together? Was that like a happy accident? Did you do it on purpose?
That was a happy accident. I didn't even think about it right now until now you said it. I didn't think about that, but yeah, the idea that you are so angry and your voice can save the universe, and then some part of you is like, but why would I? Because it hasn't saved me, and it's ignored me. If anything, it has left me in darkness. It has left me to die. So why should I save this? And the idea is that, throughout the story, you see she sees all of these things, and understand that everybody has that sound.
Right.
And everybody has their anger, and everybody has their trauma, and that we still can work together. There's still hope in togetherness. I love the idea, though, that she was using her voice for standing up to. Zara is a very powerful character, and writing her was a task, because I am a person who is very careful with how I use my anger. And she is a person who can be at her worst. If she is very angry, she could do so much damage.
Right.
And so for me, writing that, it was just, be careful. For me personally, because I was like, that way of expressing anger is, you really have to find how your voice can do it. And she does not know until she has all of these people around her helping her understand, how she can do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Very cool. She's very cool. She's fun to read.
I mean, I hope so.
Yeah, she is. It's just there's so much in it that you can definitely identify with as a person who is, I'm obviously not a teenager anymore, but like also like who I feel like I would have glommed onto as just like this like angsty little kid who's just sitting there like with my hoodie, like listening to like rock music and being and like darkness, you know what I mean? Like I think there's something in that is really accessible, which I think like you said was your goal, and so I think that you really achieved that, and I think that it's very good in insofar as like you can really see younger readers getting their like paws on it and just like really kind of getting in there and feeling connected to the story in a way that is both like whether they're coming from the series as a whole or reading individually, just getting in it, just really feeling seen, which I think is very cool, and I think that is like very well done, especially when you're writing. I mean, when you're writing for kids, you know, like that's a huge.
I had a leg up. I'm a former children's librarian, and I work with a lot of teenagers and children over the years, and I love working with teenagers and kids. I love it. There's this moment when you are working with them and you're trying to give them books that you think are going to improve their lives or give them something to think about, or just entertain them for a bit, where you want to make sure that it's the right thing, and you want to make sure that they feel good when they are reading it. And while you're writing it, you're thinking what an honor it is, because teens today are extremely strong. They are protesting, they are vocal, they are angry, and they have all the rights to do that. But I also want to make sure they feel hope as well. And with every story, that idea is at the center of it. Yes, things are bad, but there's hope. And maybe it's not always going to be the answer, but it's part of it.
Right. It's important that it's there.
It's important that it's there because I think that teens today can feel a bit hopeless.
Right.
And if you can write a story where it's like, I see you, I see your anger, here's some hope for it, that's like a joy. And it's a real privilege. And I have been very lucky that, again, my publisher said yes, and another publisher said yes, and now I get to do this. Because I know how important those books can be, and there are so many amazing books in this space, like just so many. But that I get to be there on the bookshelf means the world to me. But I hope at the end of the day, it means a little bit of the world to some readers.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And this is we can move on to my last question, but I'm going to see if anyone else has any questions. This is your warning. If you want to have a question, think about it now. In terms of just the writing space right now and writing for kids, is there anything that you in particular would want a reader to take away from this book in particular, this series, like your body of work? Like, or was there like a message that you might have needed that you've written into this that you really want like some 14-year-old to take away from it?
I think when you get to write these kind of books, and I hope that when kids read it, they feel, like I said, seen, but that you can be the protagonist in a story where it's an adventure. You can have all of these different things happen. You are not limited by the size of your body, by how you identify, by any of these things. You can change the universe. And I hope that is what they will take from it.
Right.
I want people to really feel good and be entertained, of course. But it always comes back to, we can all be the protagonist of our own story. And I want them to feel that.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a wonderful goal to write towards. And I think I can't state how much I think you succeeded. I really just, because again, in terms of the themes of anger, right, our books are very similar, and I found myself writing for angry kids as well, and so I think that there really is something in that, and I think that you definitely walked that line, and as much as anger and kind of all of these like really dark themes are part of it, like you really do feel the hope throughout, and it really does shine through, and so I think that was like an absolute success on your part. So I would say I mean, I'm biased, but I'm also right, so.
Thank you very much, thank you. I really am very happy. I'm very grateful for every opportunity I've gotten so far. And every opportunity I hope to get in the future, because this is such a fun thing to be able to do.
For sure.
And I can't stress it enough, like, this was a dream come true, and then I get to live it every day. It's just amazing. Yeah.
For sure.
All the bad things with publishing, there are plenty of bad things with publishing, but those kind of fall away when you are, I had a 17-year-old write me, and she wrote a very long email, and was like, I love this book so much. Would you be able to come to Arizona and do a book talk? And I was like, no. But I will send you my collected works and all of the swag, and I will do whatever. Like, I will send you this. And so I sent it to her, and then she sent me pictures, and she was just so happy. And she was a 17-year-old from Arizona. And it's like, I've done that a few times now, where a reader will like try every method to make sure that they can get through to me. It's on Instagram or somewhere, and then they're like, this helped me, this changed my life, this was good for me, I loved this. And you're like, let me give you everything you ever want.
He's like, I love you so much. Thank you.
I'm not a business person, so I will just like give away all my money. That's a real,
just like throw stuff at people.
take it, it's yours, I'm so glad. And that was the how I get to do this, because I will get the author copies. I get like a few author copies, and I'm like, I will give them away to anybody.
Right.
If it will, especially
But you won't
teens.
go to Arizona.
Yeah, I can't. Like Arizona, it's hot.
I'm not going to the desert. I'm so sorry.
I heard it was 115 degrees this week. I am not trying to live that way right now.
You're right. My very good friend is like from there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not going to your desert house. No, kidding me. I'll die.
This is already too much for me. I can't do that. No.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. But I think in the last couple of minutes, if anyone from the audience has any questions or anything you want to ask, Alicia, please speak up.
I'm that guy.
Over there in the corner.
So two things. One, more of a comment than anything else. I think this idea of hope is, I think, what drives a lot of adults to read YA, sci-fi, and fantasy too. Because I think while there's great adult sci-fi and fantasy, it can be bleak, right?
Me at Dune.
Right? It can just be so bleak.
We'll talk about that later.
And sometimes that's what you're looking for, but
Right.
especially when the world already feels bleak, sometimes you want to read books like this where they're dealing with that, but there's some hope at the end, right? So I think that there's always questions like, why do adults read YA? And I really think that's it.
I always think that with books, when the world seems especially bad, books come out that will hopefully make you feel good.
Yeah.
But when the world is kind of good, the books that come out are like dystopian and terrible.
Because
Because
they were written
they
whenever
want to
they
make
suck.
sure you have that balance in your life, right? I feel like that's
Yeah.
how the publishers are like, yeah, that makes sense. That's
yeah, but
what
then
we're gonna do.
they're like one emotional tick behind the curve,
Yes.
so you're just like, dear God.
But we're getting all the pandemic books now, right?
Now
I
I
can't
can't
read them. They make me itchy. Like I get stressed out.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
That is true.
Yeah,
I mean, but I get to write different universe, so I don't have to worry. I don't
for
have
sure.
to talk about the pandemic in any of my books. But I think there's truth to that. I think adults sometimes look toward young adult because there is hope, and because it doesn't. It's not complicated.
Right.
It is very direct.
Right.
And I think also, which we talked about this at the very beginning, also with like the world building things, especially with sci-fi fantasy, you can get these really, really expansive worlds without getting completely lost in the sauce. Like again, there's just something, especially with sci-fi, and I'm sure you'll agree that some sci-fi just absolutely is just getting a little too high on their own fumes.
If I get confused within like the first 10 pages and I don't know who's doing what or why, I will not be able to read that. And hard sci-fi is, and there are some amazing hard sci-fi authors too. I will never be one of them. You have to really know what you're talking about. There's a level of science, and I mean, I can do food science. I can tell you why a biscuit rises
Wait, I
in
want
the
that
oven.
though. I want to
Right,
write
that's
science.
it.
Yeah.
But that's not going to help you.
I would.
I mean, I had to read a book called Physics for like Superheroes, so I could understand how to write sci-fi the best way.
Yeah.
And that took me a really long time to get through, even though it was like it was for people who do not know this. And I was like, what? several times while reading this, like lasers. I had to learn about all these things. It was very complicated.
Laser? Is it? I don't know what it is, but laser is not what it is.
I don't know what.
I don't know what it is. Well, okay, so if you do sci-fi again, I live with aerospace engineers. I'll lend you my aerospace engineers.
I had to ask engineers stuff.
Yeah, they get really mad at me.
I asked an engineer. I was like, so if you had a laser, and it was on top of a building, and there were zombies, would you be able to kill the zombies with the laser? And you know what? They were not pleased with this
Yeah,
question.
no, they
were
get
like,
so mad at you.
there are a lot of variables in the show. Why don't you? And I was like, but it's a very good question because then that would help us if there was ever an apocalypse.
It's like, but have you considered the
Then how
implications?
helpful this could be? And it was like, that's not how things work. And I will start small, and you're like, oh, right.
It's so funny.
Okay, yeah, no, they don't enjoy some of these hypotheticals.
No,
I found them these.
I will say also, if you want to see an aerospace engineer's head spin, tell them they're a rocket scientist. They get so mad. I don't know the difference, but they're just like, I don't do propulsion. I'm like, okay, Sean. Like, like, all right, homie, whatever. And then you ask about solar sails and insist that Treasure Planet could be a thing, and then they have to leave the room.
Yeah.
Which makes me really happy.
I wrote an adult sci-fi, and I had to ask several different scientists if what I was doing made sense. And then I got really long explanations back to things, and I was confounded, and then I had to ask, so is it a yes? Because I don't know what your answer was. I'm not on your level. Talk to me like I'm a 5-year-old.
Right, it's all acronyms.
Please,
You're like,
please
oh my
help me
God.
out. But it was also I've never subbed that sci-fi book. I love that one. But it is something that I had to like learn about climate change, and I had to learn about what was it, geothermal, like you know when you are changing the landscape of
terraform.
yeah, something like this. I had to learn that, and I didn't learn very well. 'Cause I did not even know what it was called.
Like, did I forgot what it was called?
Yeah, but I had to learn stuff like this, and I went, okay, so that book's gonna sit for a good
Yeah,
10
for sure.
years before I can like catch up to what I'm trying to do.
Right. But if you're gonna get it wrong joyfully. You know what I mean? Like, if you're gonna do it wrong how what was it called? A Knight's Tale did history wrong.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
But
if
they
you're
were
gonna,
like, they gave into that.
right,
Right
that's
away.
the thing.
Yeah.
If we're flaunting the rules, ABBA should also be there. That's not the right. It's Queen, not ABBA. Dear Lord, my brain is soup. But if you're gonna do it wrong joyfully.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
just have a good time.
Yeah. for
But
sure.
unfortunately, if you are writing sci-fi for adults, you cannot.
No, you cannot.
They really have rules. You cannot read them.
Yeah.
I've learned that also, which is why I have not written and subbed an adult sci-fi yet, because I'm like, I have to know the rules, and I am
And then
not
you
there
can
yet.
write them, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not there yet.
There's also something with, and again, I don't read a ton of it, but with the hard sci-fi I've read, that you don't get with young adult sci-fi, which is they're very proud of the message being colonialism is bad, and you're just like, yeah, dude, like it's like you're reading these books and just like the way they're just like, we're the first one to think of this. I'm like, you're not. Like it's just
Some of them are very good. I think Philip K. Dick did a lot of, and Octavia Butler, of course.
I mean, goes without saying.
But when you look at the work of Philip K. Dick, and you are reading it, and you're like, this is really a cool concept.
Mhm.
And a lot of them are short stories, so they're very accessible, like Minority Report and all of these other things. And you just read that, and you're like, wow, that's very clever. But it doesn't delve too deeply into the technology of it, which is how you retain people reading it.
Mhm.
But then there are other people who are like, shoot past that and are like, I'm going to explain every tech detail
Right.
of this one ship that only happens in chapter 3.
It's like, if you couldn't make a model out of Legos, I haven't done my job. And it's like, oh boy. It's like, we are trying to do different things, my guy. But, okay, we got a little off topic, but I think we have time for one more audience question if anyone has one. I'm getting a nod that says we have time for one more potentially. Sure.
Congrats on your book launch.
Thank you very much.
So my question, you talked about writing in a lot of like different genres, but other than joy, like what other themes or other things like do you feel like is kind of the thread of the writing that you do?
That is a very good question. I think I've always, in my head, I write books that are very character driven. And I think that I've always written character driven books. I can't tell you you for certain if that's true. Because some people will tell you that A Song of Salvation is very plot-driven. And some people will say it's character-driven because it's different to every person who reads something. So I think that's what I'm doing. And in every book I have written, I have a big black girl at the center of it because that is what I love. I love writing these characters. And now that I'm approaching middle grade in October, it was really, again, going with joy, but also going with feelings and really just expounding on that. Because I think right now, I also wrote an anthology piece, An Absolutely Normal by Rocky Callan and Nora Shalloway Carpenter that came out in April, and my short anthology piece was called We Are Stardust, which is about a star that falls to Earth and becomes a human. And it is about having a mental illness and understanding your power. And that was really beautiful to write, and I loved it, and I was like crying when I was writing. I was like, it was very dramatic. But yeah, it was an intense time. I loved it. But then when I think about all the stories I've written, We Are Stardust is at the heart of all of them because I've always looked at mental illness, mental health with kids because it's not always talked about, and because since the beginning of the pandemic, mental illness has risen exponentially. And if we aren't talking about it, then we aren't destigmatizing it. If we're not destigmatizing it, then we are going to lose kids. So we have to have these conversations. So that's what I've been thinking about with each book, and I didn't really realize it until I wrote We Are Stardust. And I was like, oh, I think I'm doing that with all of my stories. I just didn't know it. And then like last month I was doing an interview with Nora, and Nora asked me the question, like, did you realize that you wrote Wesley with like this, mental illness? And I was like, no. And I went, did I? And then she's like, yeah. And I went, oh, I didn't realize. I did not realize that I've been doing that, and I think I have been the entire time. So I have learned a lot from other people about what I've been doing. And it's been great. Now I can lean into it.
And now you can do it on purpose.
Now I can do it on purpose.
All right, we're getting that on. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for chatting, and this was really great.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the live streaming as well. And also,
Thanks,
there's
y'all.
free cookies. Please get them.
You should get them. She's really, really good baker.
And swag as well.
Also, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.